What's going on, folks? Nate here at Dyno, and today we are going to do a little bit of a deep dive on the Z900RS and the common modifications and some not so common modifications and what that looks like on the dyno in terms of making power. Now, we've flashed nearly 1,000 Z900 and Z900RSs here at Dyno. We've seen just about every intake and exhaust combination imaginable for these bikes, but this one that I'm sitting on is a little different, which is why we're going to talk about it today. So before we get into the one I'm sitting on, let's take a look at the graph here I've got on the screen. This is a bone stock Z900RS. These are the lower compression, earlier torque building versions of the Z900 engines. They make about 98 horsepower and 68 foot-pounds of torque to the tire, bone stock. Now, just about nobody leaves these bikes stock. The stock catalytic converter and header design is dog shit, to put it bluntly. It is stupidly heavy. It looks like crap. So the single most popular map for the RS models that we've ever done is the Acura header with the stock muffler. More of you guys have done the Acura header with the stock muffler exhaust combination than every other exhaust combination combined. Fun fact. And those results with our custom mapping look like that. You know, power comes up to almost 110 horsepower and just about 1.5 foot-pounds of torque more across the entire RPM range, which is fantastic. But it's still not the same power that the Z900s make with, say, the full Acura system and just a basic DNA air filter. Now, the RS models of these Z900s are supposed to be a earlier torque building, a little bit more streetable, kind of retro design, which is great. I actually love the design of the RS. I think it looks way better than the Z900s. But at the top end of the RPM range, there's some big power differences. I'll show you here really quick what the Z900 with a full Acura and an air filter looks like versus a 900RS with an Acura and an air filter. At the top end, you're talking about a nearly 22 horsepower gain, which is real big. Oh, what can you do to get more out of your RS? Well, that's what this one came in here for. This customer brought in a set of Z900 cams to go ahead and install in here, as well as a thin head gasket, because the stock RS pistons have a huge dish in them, because again, it's a lower compression engine. So between the thin head gasket and the Z900 cams, the idea was to get some of that peak power back that the Z900s make without losing too much of the bottom end. And that is almost exactly what he got. You're never going to get away from the cam difference and the compression difference making the torque and the power sooner, say like 3,000-4,000 RPMs, or run 11, which is again the Z900RS with an Acura and our custom mapping, versus the blue line there, run 16, which makes clearly that much bigger top end number, 124 horsepower, 70 foot-pounds of torque, but the power curve is very different. Now, in terms of what that feels like when you're actually riding the bike, let's face it, you're never at 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 RPMs on these things at wide open throttle. You are cruising around town and coasting around at that speed, maybe just cruising on the highway, but when you're actually getting on the throttle, you're going to be 6,000 plus pretty much everywhere, which is where this combination builds some pretty significant gains. Now, we also have some data from, I won't say whose cams, an aftermarket cam that's made, and I will show that to you now because honestly, the stock Z900 cams in the Z900RS kicks the shit out of the aftermarket ones that are available for the RS models. So what you're looking at here is what I'm going to remain those unnamed aftermarket cams versus, that is run 6 by the way, 117 horse and 67 foot-pounds of torque, versus the Z900 cams that run 16, 124 horsepower and 70 torque number. You can see they're starting at like 4,500 RPMs. You lose even more with the aftermarket cams, all the way to 6,000 RPMs. They barely break even until 7,000 RPMs, and then the stock Z900 cams just run away. So would I ever recommend doing the aftermarket cams that are available for the Z900RSs from some big name manufacturers? No, absolutely not. You lose even more off the bottom than you do with the Z900 cams, and you gain even less at the top end. So if you want more power out of your Z900RS at the upper 2/3 of the RPM range, where you really want the additional power if you're actually riding these bikes, then yes, absolutely. The Z900 cam package is a huge improvement. Again, this was not an aggressively thin head gasket. This is just one that Cometic made up for this customer. There's still plenty of material there. You are nowhere near dangerous in terms of compression because, again, these Z900RSs have a hugely dished piston. And then some of you are probably wondering, well, how does this actually compare to the normal Z900 in terms of performance once you have those cams in the RS model with the thin head gasket? Well, I'll show you. It's not quite as good in terms of performance as a Z900 with the same set of exhaust and intake modifications, but it's getting pretty darn close compared to where these bikes normally are with an Acura header and custom ECU flashing. That there is a 2020 Z900, there run 27, full Acura, DNA air filter, our custom ECU flash. 128 horsepower. Still about 4 more horse, and that 4 horse gain is pretty much everywhere from 6,000 RPMs up, and that is just due to the additional compression that the Z900 engine has. You're just not going to find additional compression with a thin head gasket or any kind of headwork, simply when the pistons in the RS models have as much of a dish as they do from the factory. So for you Z900RS owners, would I recommend this modification? Absolutely. There's a 15 horsepower increase at the top end. The horsepower you're losing at the bottom end of the RPM range there until about 5,000 RPMs, you're just not ever going to feel, because by the time you ever get to full throttle on one of these bikes, you're already above 5,000 RPMs. We showed that launch time essentially from all the way down at the bottom of the RPM range just for accurate dyno comparisons, but if you're ever getting to full throttle on these bikes below 5,000-6,000 RPMs, you should have started at a higher RPM. Just that simple. You're never there in a real-world riding application. And even where you have to sacrifice a little bit of performance there at 6,000 RPMs, if I eliminate the Z900RS with the stock cams run, that is a much more linear power curve, literally through the entire RPM range. And when you're riding the bike, it feels much more connected to your wrist. So that's it for today, folks. And again, we have custom mapping built on the dyno for every intake and exhaust combination imaginable for both the RS and the standard Z900 models, as well as obviously several different cam options. I can guarantee you won't find any other shops doing the R&D and building of the custom mapping with a sheer breadth of different intake, exhaust, and cam options than we do here at Two Wheel Dyno Works. So if you'd like to get your ECU flash, go to twowheeldynoworks.com and get yours done today. If you have any questions, as always, we're more than happy to help. Please give us a call or shoot us an email, support@twowheeldynoworks.com.